All right, welcome back everyone to the deep dive. I'm really excited about this one. We got such an awesome response to our last deep dive on Pakistan as a top tourist spot. I think a lot of you are really thinking about booking a trip, which is so cool.
Yeah, it's great to see people getting enthusiastic about such a beautiful and culturally rich country. There's so much to see there.
Absolutely. And one of the things that a lot of you have been asking about is safety, especially for solo travelers. Is it safe to explore Pakistan on your own? And we know this is a big question, even more so for women traveling solo. So in this deep dive, we've been digging into a bunch of sources to really figure out what the deal is with safety in Pakistan.
Yeah, we really want to give you guys a balanced view, looking at what our sources say about safety in general, but also what they say about experiences for women who travel solo. We want you to feel like you have the information to decide if a solo adventure in Pakistan is the right move for you.
Okay, so let's jump right in. One thing that really stands out from the stuff we've read is the difference between how people think of Pakistan in terms of safety and then what it's actually like, you know, on the ground. There seems to be a bit of a disconnect there, right?
Yeah, for sure. I think some of those old media portrayals of Pakistan are still hanging around. But the information we found pretty much all points to the security situation being way better now than it used to be. Places like Lahore, Islamabad, Karachi, even the Hunza Valley, the Karakoram Highway, and Skardu all seem to be pretty safe for tourists these days.
Yeah, that's good to hear. Especially after we were just talked about all the amazing scenery in those places last time.
Yeah.
But I guess it's fair to say that those old stories haven't completely gone away, and some people have had maybe different experiences.
Yeah, that's an important point. The overall trend is positive, but there are always individual experiences to consider. One source we looked at specifically about women traveling alone talked about how, they sometimes had to deal with stares and even some mild harassment. So while it's generally safer now, it's still smart to be careful and aware of your surroundings.
Right. You always got to be aware no matter where you are.
Hmm.
And when it comes to solo female travelers, it seems like it is totally doable, even a really powerful experience. But it's probably a different scene compared to if you're traveling alone as a guy or part of a group.
Totally. It's interesting because while it might be less common to see women traveling solo in Pakistan, which could mean more attention, it also seems like it can open up unique opportunities, like meeting people and going places that maybe men wouldn't have access to as easily. But the sources also say that the whole experience can feel more intense. So having some self-awareness and maybe even some solo travel experience under your belt would probably help a lot in navigating it comfortably.
Okay, so let's talk about specifics. Where should solo travelers head to in Pakistan? And especially women traveling alone. Are there any places that are particularly welcoming?
The Hunza Valley keeps coming up as the top recommendation, especially for women. It's often described as the most liberal part of Pakistan, and that's mainly because of its Ismaili culture, which tends to be more open and progressive. They have a high literacy rate, women-owned businesses, and people say that women can generally walk alone without feeling unsafe. Apparently, the men there are respectful and there's less harassment.
That sounds amazing, like a really good starting point for a solo trip in Pakistan. What about other spots? Were there any other places that stood out in our research?
Oh, yeah. Vander Valley in the Geyser District. It's super peaceful, and the natural beauty is unreal. Like the lake and the rivers are this intense blue color. It's got a similar vibe to Hunza. Very friendly people, but with fewer tourists, so maybe more low key and budget friendly. Plus, you can get there by public transport from Gilgit, which is a major plus if you're traveling solo.
Less crowded and easy to get to. That definitely sounds like a good option for some peace and quiet. But what about the big cities? Like, what's the word on places like Islamabad, Lahore, and Karachi?
Well, those cities are generally described as pretty modern and relatively liberal, particularly in the areas that are more like westernized. They could be good for starting out a solo trip, more familiar things, more of an international vibe. Our source that focuses on solo female travel even mentioned couch surfing being a thing in those cities, although they were very clear that women need to be careful, like really read reviews and choose hosts who have good feedback from other women who've traveled solo.
Yeah, that's a really good point about being cautious with couch surfing, especially when you're alone. Were there any other places that our sources recommended specifically?
Upper Chitral, especially the Yarkam Valley. It's supposed to be incredible. The people there, the Ismaili people, are known for being super friendly and hospitable. There's even a specific guest house mentioned, the Tourist Garden Guest House in Masdouj. Apparently, it's really welcoming to travelers, and the area is generally safe and peaceful, even though it's pretty close to Afghanistan. But the source on solo female travel did say that for women going there alone, it might be a good idea to have a local guide or friend, just for safety and navigating things.
It seems like the North, with those more liberal cultures in the big cities, are the easiest and safest places to explore on your own. But let's talk about the other side of that. Are there any areas that our sources recommend avoiding, especially for women traveling alone?
Definitely. Balochistan and Fata, the federally administered tribal areas, are no-go zones for tourists. There are still conflicts happening there, and safety is a big concern. It's important to know that you usually need a special permit, an NOC, to even go there, so you're not likely to end up there accidentally. These permits are usually for areas where there are security concerns or the government doesn't have full control, according to our sources.
Okay, that's a pretty clear warning.
Yeah.
What about other regions in Pakistan? Are there other places to be cautious about?
Well, areas close to the Pakistan-India border in Azad Kashmir and some parts of KPK, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, are also places to be extra careful. Our sources say to check travel advisories before you go and talk to local people. But the good news is that the popular tourist spots in KPK, like Naran and Kagan, are generally considered safe, and so is Upper Chitral, which we talked about earlier.
So it's all about being informed, knowing what's going on in each region specifically. What about Sindh province? Anything to know about that area, apart from Karachi?
Sindh is kind of a different story. It's not necessarily dangerous, but it's just less used to foreign tourists, especially women traveling solo. There have been some reports of harassment from authorities, being forced to have armed guards, and even some restrictions on staying with locals. So maybe it's best to visit Sindh later in your trip, after you've gotten a feel for things in Pakistan. And if you're going to stay there, maybe stick to well-rated local couch surfing hosts.
Sounds like local connections are really important in the less traveled parts of the country. Are there any general things that solo travelers should be aware of, like places that might be a bit more sensitive?
Yeah, our sources all emphasize that conservative areas need to be approached with caution. In many of those places, it's not that common to see women out on their own, and how people see interactions between men and women might be different than in more liberal places. So, dressing modestly and being respectful of local customs is super important to avoid any unwanted attention or misunderstandings.
That makes total sense. Blending in and respecting local customs is good advice no matter where you travel. Okay, so let's switch gears a bit and talk about the practical side of things. How much does it cost to travel in Pakistan? Our sources mentioned expenses, but they didn't give specific numbers.
The general sense is that Pakistan can be pretty easy on the wallet. It sounds like there are affordable options like guest houses and hostels, but you can also find more upscale boutique hotels, international chains, especially in the cities. And for getting around in those cities, ride-sharing apps like Careem and Uber are supposed to be pretty cheap and reliable. They also mention hiring private drivers, which could be a good option if you're splitting the cost with other people.
So there are options for every budget, and technology is making it easier to get around. What about documentation? Like, do our sources talk about visas or any other paperwork you need?
Unfortunately, they don't go into detail about visas or other travel documents, but it's obvious that that's like essential stuff for any international travel. So I would say anyone listening who's thinking about going to Pakistan needs to check with their country's embassy or the official Pakistani government website for the most up-to-date information.
Absolutely, that's super important. Okay, so let's talk safety tips. What do our sources suggest for solo travelers, especially women?
For general safety, it's pretty much the usual stuff. Keep your emergency contacts handy, use reliable transport, stay informed about what's going on locally and any travel warnings, and avoid political rallies or big crowds that could get out of control.
That's good advice for any traveler anywhere in the world. But what about cultural stuff? Our sources had a lot to say about that, right?
Yeah, definitely. They all stress the importance of dressing modestly, especially in conservative areas or when visiting religious sites. That generally means covering your arms and legs, like wearing long sleeves and pants or a longer skirt. Learning a few basic Urdu phrases is also a good idea. Saying hello, assalamu alaikum, and thank you, shukriya, goes a long way in showing respect and connecting with people. It's also important to be mindful of how you greet and interact with people of the opposite gender. A nod or placing your right hand over your heart is often more appropriate than a handshake, especially when you first meet someone.
Right, those little cultural nuances can make a big difference. What else did our sources say about cultural stuff?
Well, you gotta respect people's privacy when taking photos. Always ask permission before you snap a picture of someone, especially in rural areas. They also said that Pakistanis are known for their hospitality, so be open and polite. If you're visiting a mosque or a religious site, you should cover your head. And they also advised being discreet about drinking alcohol and definitely avoiding being drunk in public. It's also not really the norm to show strong emotions in public. And lastly, maybe be careful about discussing religion or politics with people you've just met.
It sounds like a combination of common sense and being aware of local customs. What about advice specifically for women traveling alone? Our sources had some really targeted tips.
Yeah, this is important. One of the biggest things they stressed was never giving your phone number to men you don't know. One of our sources had a personal story about how that can lead to some unwanted attention. Also, bring enough tampons with you because they can be hard to find sometimes. And like anywhere else, avoid walking around alone at night.
Those are really good tips. What else should solo women keep in mind?
If you're talking to men, use respectful terms like pai for brother or cha-cha for uncle. That can help set boundaries and show that you're not interested in anything romantic. As soon as you arrive, get a local SIM card for your phone. It'll make communication and navigating way easier. Telenor, Jazz, Zong, and Scom are the main providers depending on where you are. And if you're taking an Uber or Cream in a city, sit in the back seat. Oh, and again, learning a few basic Urdu phrases can really improve your experience and even contribute to your safety.
So being smart, knowing the culture, and taking a few precautions can make a big difference. What about meeting local people? Did our sources have any advice on that?
They said that accepting invitations to family homes can be an amazing way to experience real Pakistani culture, but make sure it feels like a genuine invitation. If you're using couch surfing, be extra careful, especially as a solo woman. Read the reviews carefully and choose hosts who have good feedback from other women. Joining female-only Facebook groups is another way to connect with other women, both locals and travelers. And lastly, seek out places run by women like the Hunza Food Pavilion and the Gulmit Carpet Center. They can be really safe and supportive spaces.
It's really cool to see these resources specifically for women travelers. Okay, so to wrap things up, what's the main takeaway from all this research on solo travel and safety in Pakistan?
Well, from what we've gathered, it seems like solo travel in Pakistan can be an incredible, rewarding experience. It might have its challenges, especially for women, but with the right preparation, cultural awareness, and sensible precautions, it can be safe and truly unforgettable.
It seems like, even though it might be a little outside some people's comfort zones, Pakistani hospitality and culture is something really special.
Definitely. One of our sources said something really beautiful about how the best personal growth often comes from going beyond what we're comfortable with and trying things that might seem a little scary at first. It's about how immersing ourselves in different cultures, even with the challenges, can help us understand the world and ourselves better.
That's a great point to end on. So thanks for taking us through this important topic, and thanks to everyone for joining us on the deep dive.
Glad to be here.
And if you want to keep exploring amazing destinations and topics with us, make sure to subscribe to our Next.Clicks YouTube and Facebook pages. We've got tons more deep dives coming your way.